Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We have a full house tonight, so we got some seats up here. If there's, we don't need to do standing room only in the back. Come on up. Don't be shy. So thanks for everybody for coming out today. A few house items to cover before we get started with the main event. My name is Nate Taylor. I work for LinkedIn. I'm the vice chair for the ICT committee. Our chairman here, Rex Engelking. We try to put on some interesting events for you guys at least once a month, and happy to have Uber here. So a few things to begin with are the name badges. Let's look around. We've got some different colors, if you'll notice. The first ones are our favorite ones. These are the gray ones. It's because you're not yet a member. Love seeing it. There's a big number of you here today and a lot of new faces that I haven't seen. So I hope that you can find some value out of these talks. I hope that you see the value in AmCham. We'd love to have you part of the family. The second one, of course, the red badges you see. I think we have at least one here today. They're the governors or trustees. Yellow badges are committee chairs and vice chairs, and the members are wearing all the blue badges. So also remind everybody, we're a cell phone culture, but let's put them all on silent. So remember to do that, please. So let's get to the main event. I'd like to introduce Sam. Sam, previously from Goldman Sachs, has been general manager for Uber, especially on the expansion part here in Asia, getting to work with an exciting launch of a disruptive technology within all these markets. And previously, I believe, Stanford graduate. And how long now in Hong Kong? 8 years, okay. So welcome Sam to the table tonight. We'll go through his talk, and then afterwards just have a Q&A session. We'll pass around the microphones and let you guys interact with that. So Sam, come on up.
Great. Thank you guys. Let's make sure this works here. That's not what we want. Yeah, thanks Nate, and thanks AmCham. I really appreciate you guys having me here to talk about Uber. I'll give you guys a bit of background on myself, and then I'll go into Uber, specifically about how I got to Uber. I moved to Hong Kong in 2006, working with Goldman Sachs. About 6 years into it, I was ready for a change. I love Goldman Sachs. They treated me really well. It was a great place to work. And I was just on Facebook with a friend of mine who had been a client back in San Francisco, and we were just talking, and I told her I was looking for new work, and she said, "Oh, you should come work for Uber." She's the secretary for the CEO now. I had no idea what Uber was, but eventually she connected me with the CEO. We had a couple conversations, and literally 3 weeks later, I got this job at Uber, and I was the first international employee. I'd never taken a ride with Uber in my life. I'll be perfectly honest, I actually didn't fully get the concept when I got hired. But there's something that happens when you work at Uber. It's a culture where you just become a huge believer and an enormous advocate for what we do. And it's just an incredible, incredible place to work, and an incredible thing to be a part of. And the most amazing thing, when I got to Uber, we were in 5 cities. I was in March 2012. Now we're in 150. I think our bookings have grown probably 50x since I got to the company. So just watching the growth, seeing things happen that I would have thought completely impossible 2.5 years ago has been really, really incredible. I'm going to start by showing a quick video that we put out when we launched Beijing, which was our 100th city. One more thing on my own, kind of what I've done at Uber. I started running the expansion in Europe. I moved to London, where I ran the launch of London. I ran the launch of Amsterdam. Then I moved out to Asia as the head of Asia expansion, and I oversaw the launch of Singapore and Shanghai. Managed a team that did all of Asia, and then got engaged 3 months ago and decided to be permanently based in Hong Kong. So right now I'm running the Hong Kong business as our general manager here, which has been absolutely fantastic. But I'll talk a bit about that a little later. Just to start, I'm going to show a quick video about Uber. We put this out when we launched Beijing, which was our 100th city, and I think it gives a little sense of the culture and what Uber's about.
It's easy to lose a sense of connection living in a city.
But when you bring people together,
it starts to really feel like home.
this isn't just an idea. It's happening on the ground and around the world every day.
Innovation
may seem like magic.
But at its core,
It's about finding a simpler way to do something.
Functional minimalism is simpler.
Finding a simpler way to do something. Every place is unique, with its own culture, roads,
maps,
buildings. What they all have in common
What they all have in common is
people.
It's people. People trying to get from one place to another.
My city.
My city.
This is my
I
city.
feel like I've gotten to know my city again. I feel like I've gotten to explore my city again.
I feel like I've fallen in love with my city again.
Okay. So that's kind of where we are now. You know, we're in 100 cities and have this real kind of celebration of cities all over the world happening. I'm going to talk a bit about how we got there and what Uber looked like when I got to Uber, and before then, and kind of what, and just how we've progressed since then. Although I'm having a hard time here with this, which is a bit frustrating. Let's see if this works. Here we go. All right, that's a relief. Okay. So just so I know, how many of you guys had heard of Uber a month ago? Okay, so most of you. How many guys have taken a ride with Uber? Okay, cool. So we'll have to get everyone else doing it pretty soon. And I'll tell you guys how to do that. But going back, just kind of where do we start? It starts with these two guys here. It's Travis Kalanick on the left, and again, I'm Garrett Camp on the right. And Garrett's actually never worked at Uber, but these were the two founders. And you know, they're both serial entrepreneurs who had started companies and sold companies before. And they were talking to each other. It was in Paris, but they were saying, what would make our lives a little bit easier? And I guess the way that these guys constantly think is just what's my life missing, or what would be kind of a fun thing to do. And what Travis said was, he said, how about we get an app where you can push a button, and within minutes, a Mercedes S-Class pulls up to your door and picks you up wherever you are and takes you where you need to go. It's kind of like you have your own private chauffeur, but instead, these guys are tech geeks, so instead of actually hiring someone and buying a car, they figured they'd build an app, they'd give it to about 10 friends, and the 10 of them would share it. And they'd give it to 2 drivers, and that would be it. And they'd just have this little tool, and you'd go to a party and push a button, and everyone else would be wondering kind of how you just had a Mercedes S-Class pull up, and how did the driver know your name, and how did you walk out at the end and not have to pay any cash? Just how did that whole thing happen? And it would just be this party trick that the 10 of them would share. And this was just 4 years ago. The other thing was that in San Francisco, there are only 1,200 taxi medallions. So that number doesn't change. They're just 1,200. In Hong Kong, there are 18,000. In Seoul, there are 70,000. So it puts into perspective just how undersupplied the taxi market was in Hong Kong. And they said, how about we just don't worry about taxis? We get our own private drivers. Now, you needed a password in order to download the app. So it wasn't, it literally was not about making money. It was just about having this fun little toy. And I think the ultimate proof that it wasn't about making money was that neither of these two guys even wanted to work on the app or even work for the company. What they did eventually, I go back to here, what they found pretty quickly was that as they started using this toy, other people liked it. And Travis says that suddenly he would spend his whole day deciding who could get the password and who couldn't. And eventually they said, okay, maybe we should just turn this into a company. Maybe there's something real going on here. And again, the proof that these guys weren't interested in making money was neither of them actually wanted to even work at the company. Neither Travis nor Garrett, they looked at each other. They said, I don't want to work for a car company. And Garrett said, neither do I. So what they did was they went onto Twitter. And Travis here tweeted, he said, have this big idea, big equity, big people involved, just need a CEO, any tips? and a 25-year-old who was living in my hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, working for General Electric on a rotational program, had gone to Miami of Ohio, never managed a person in his life, responded and said, here's a tip, email me, and he put his email address. The two of them had a conversation, and Ryan blew these guys away. Brian had so much hustle, had so much passion, got the concept immediately and flew out to San Francisco 3 days later, and Ryan became the first CEO of Uber. Ryan is still the COO of Uber. He ran the company for the first 8 months. And I think that this story, when I got to Uber, there were just 35 of us, and Ryan was my boss. And I think that this story permeates everything that happens at the company. It is just a place where it is all about hustle. We didn't hire a single PR internal person or external person for our first 2 years. We've never really had an advertising agency. All the kind of traditional ways that companies grow, Uber's never done. And I think it all goes back to the way that Ryan got this first job and that hustle that went into that initial interaction that really defines what it's like to work at Uber and what our culture is all about. This is the first app. This app, it's very, very basic. That car there is what would come up if you type black car clip art on Google. That was the first image you'd get. And this is what the app was. You push a button, but it was incredibly simple, but it worked. You push a button, and a Mercedes S-Class or a Lincoln Town Car would show up at your door in minutes. This was an exciting moment for us at Uber. We have this tool called God View, where you can see where all the cars are, and where all the riders are, and where everyone's going. And this was really exciting because what's happening here is you have these 3 blue lines, and then that guy up there with raising his hand, that's 4 rides that were going on, and no one at Uber knew any of the 4 riders. So everyone's jumping around giving each other high fives, like, wow, we have something on our hands that could actually work. This is in summer of 2010, because we had 4 rides going on and we didn't know anybody. Now, if you fast forward 6 months, this is what San Francisco looked like. And now if you looked at San Francisco, it would just be one big black thing because there's so many rides going on simultaneously there. But what you'll see here is not only is it no longer that we just focus on one central area. People always ask us, why do you only focus in Hong Kong on central? And it's because when you only have a certain number of cars, you can only focus on a certain area. Just like in San Francisco, we only focused on a certain area in the beginning, but eventually you can get a ride anywhere. Now you can get a ride anywhere in the entire Bay Area. But what you also have is you have different car types here. So these guys look different. And what we realized was that luxury to most people isn't about a Mercedes S-Class. Luxury is about pushing a button and not needing to worry about hailing down a car. It's about having someone out there waiting for you with the door open. It's about affordability. It's about being accessible. And luxury at Uber really went from this kind of like glam, high-end product to being about simplicity. I ran our Shanghai business. Every day before I took a shower, I'd order an Uber and get ready. I knew that 10 minutes later there'd be a guy outside waiting with the door open. And I didn't really care if the car was nice or not, but my life just became really, really easy. And that's really what Uber has kind of become. The biggest thing for my team, my old team, when we were launching cities is every single place we would go, people would tell us we would fail. I'd say, this is great for San Francisco, but it just will never work in New York, because in New York you have taxis everywhere. When I went to London, and I have newspaper articles that I could have put in this presentation where everyone says we're going to fail, and everyone cites someone on Twitter who tweeted something about a bad Uber experience. The SCMP actually did the same thing a couple weeks ago. So we've seen this many, many times about cities. But what's interesting is this is a chart of our first 8 cities. It's actually a really old chart, but the trend is telling. This blue line here is San Francisco's growth. And all these other lines are the new cities' growth. So you can see New York grew faster than San Francisco, and DC grew faster than New York. And every single city that we launched, Uber grew faster and faster. And we found that that's still the case. And I'll kind of extend that into now when we launch cities in the US, it just becomes vertical. But even our international cities now are growing faster than even DC on this map. The past couple years, we've gone into cities all over the world. So when I was launching London, I called Ryan. I said, Ryan, we're in 5 cities in the U.S. It works in the U.S. It's going to be really hard here. We have all these competitors. No one knows about Uber. No one cares. And he was really, encouraging, but also saying, shut up, just get to work and make people care. And that was really kind of the message that I got. And the amazing thing is how 100% right he was, but it never occurred to me we would succeed in a place like Dubai, South Africa, Latin America, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City. All these cities are growing like crazy, but the past year we launched in Africa, we launched in the Middle East, we launched in Latin America, and I'll talk a bit more about Asia pretty soon. We also last year got $258 million from Google at a $3.4 billion valuation. So we got this partner in Google who has really blanketed the world with their product. And there's no one who does it better than them. So we got this incredible partner who also invested in our most recent round. We just a month ago announced a fundraising at a $17 billion valuation, where we raised $1 billion mainly from mutual funds, but Google actually was involved in that round as well. So they've been a great partner to us. I think there's a very common question. It's people who are like me when I was joining Uber. It's like, why is this working? I don't get it. My city doesn't need it. I've been getting around my city forever without Uber, and I don't think it'll work here. I'm actually going to tell you another story here. LA was the 7th city we went into, and San Diego was the 12th. Now, LA now is one of our top 3 cities, but so why was LA 7th? Why did it take so long? It's because Travis, our CEO, is from LA, and no one thinks that Uber is going to succeed in their own city. So he didn't think we would succeed in LA. So we actually didn't go there. And we didn't go to San Diego because Ryan Graves, who was our first CEO, is from there as well. And he was like, no, this isn't going to work. So it's not just external people who think this is, who doubt Uber. It's people internally as well, originally at least. But I have this picture of Starbucks here. And I always put this up when I was launching in China. Because in China's just an incredibly different market, and we faced all sorts of obstacles in China. And people would constantly say, well, I get it, like why, I get why this works elsewhere. I don't get why it will work in China. We get around fine as it is. And I always think of the Starbucks brand. Before Starbucks came to China, there was absolutely no coffee problem in China. People actually didn't even drink coffee. And people who did could easily get coffee for 10 RMB. And Starbucks came in and created an experience around coffee and created consistency and made it cool and made it something that you could do with your friends. And they charged 30 RMB for a coffee. And suddenly they just started building a brand. You can't go to a Starbucks in all of China without seeing it completely full. And I think that you have a lot of examples actually of foreign brands that have been able to go there and to build really good brand equity and resonate really well with the local consumer. And I always see that as kind of a goal for us when we're in China. The other reason I put the Starbucks up there is because our minimum fares in China are cheaper than a latte at Starbucks. We're constantly fighting this idea that Uber is exclusive and Uber is just for the rich and famous. I think that one of our best brand attributes is that we're accessible. And so I always am reminding people, if you can afford a latte at Starbucks, you can afford to ride Uber. So yeah, this is just one of the things that I think we're doing well when we go into the many places we go. This is a picture of a guy named Zhu. He was a driver who was with us in Singapore. And I think the story that we're telling more and more, but that we haven't told that much, is just how much money drivers are making using Uber, how many jobs we're creating. We recently published a statistic that Uber is creating 20,000 jobs per month globally. And in 2013, our median income for drivers in San Francisco was $74,000. So what we're finding is that jobs are being created left and right, and we're creating opportunity for drivers to build their fleets. So this guy, when I was launching in Singapore, said, Sam, this is great. I'm glad to work with you guys, but it's not going to work here. So I'll do it for these first 3 months because you're paying me and because I like you, but I have serious doubts. He has since, and this has just been in the past year and a half, bought 5 Mercedes E-Classes and hired 7 people to drive them all on the Uber platform. And that's I'd say the most rewarding part about Uber is seeing the way these entrepreneurs are building businesses around it. And I think the coolest thing going on at Uber right now, the absolute coolest thing, is that we're actually able to fund drivers so that we're kind of a middleman, but get banks to give drivers loans who can then build their business on the Uber platform. And in the US, you have immigrants who come to New York and who could never get credit to save their lives because they're just, they're very new immigrants and have no credit rating. But we see that they've been working on the Uber platform for a year. They've been working from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And they've gotten ratings from every rider that says 4.7 stars or higher. And we know that that's a very creditworthy person. So we're able to get people access to capital that they never had before. And that's just the ecosystem that we've been able to develop. This is, I think there's another great thing that we have is bringing technology to transportation. So and it's a space where there's, if you look at Hong Kong, just the average driver, you're still using phones. You're still using the technology is your memory. And I think that one of the things that Uber does that's so transformational is brings technology to help solve these problems of urban logistics in a space that just has not had it for ages. So what this is it looks like a map of San Francisco. What this really is every route that an Uber driver took over a 6-hour period in December 2013. And what we have is there are roads in here that aren't on Google Maps because our drivers know about all the ins and outs in the alleyways. So we're building this map that's far more detailed. And we do it every 6 hours of every day in our big cities, which is far more detailed than what even the best map providers have because we have so much going on the streets. There's the riders. So I've kind of talked about a hodgepodge of things, but another thing, I think one of the big questions that is you guys don't hire PR, you don't hire advertising agencies. How do you, I shouldn't say we don't, now we're starting to hire PR, but we haven't in the past. How do you get the word out? And the way we do it is by creating things that get people talking about Uber. As easy as it is, there's something about pushing a button and getting a car. I read an article once where a driver in LA said that 1 out of every 2 customers when they get in the car calls someone and says that they're in an Uber. That there's that kind of effect where people just want to start talking about us. But eventually, you get sick of telling people, hey, I'm in an Uber. And what Uber does is we create other reasons that you can tell people you're using Uber. So 3 years ago, we said if we can get everyone a car in 5 minutes, and our arrival times in New York are under 5 minutes, we said, how could we, what else could we do? And we decided, how about every time you push a button, an ice cream truck pulls up and delivers ice cream to you. And we put ice cream trucks on the streets of Boston, Chicago, and New York. And it was like you're a kid again, where people, you could order a black car, or you could order a cheap car, or you could order ice cream. And it has made it to the front page of the New York Times, just delivering ice cream. The next 2 years, this year, we just did Uber ice cream here in Hong Kong. We partnered with Ecstasy Gelato, where you could push a button and we would bring Ecstasy Gelato to you at your office. And we just had these brand ambassadors just sitting around IFC, and they just get pulled into all the different offices and giving ice cream. And we did it in 150 cities around the world, where anywhere you were, you could push a button and you could get ice cream. And the social media impact of that is pretty crazy. This year is called Ubercade, where in DC around an election, you could push a button and 1 out of every 20 cars, instead of getting a car, you would get a driver, but then you'd have 2 Escalades in front and behind you who would be, it would be an Ubercade, who would be your bodyguards, and they'd clear the way. So that was how, so that was how 5% of Washington, D.C. Uber users got to work one day in D.C. And again, this isn't, we like doing it, but it's really just to get people to keep telling our story for us. Rider Zero. Every city we go into, we have people who take our first ride. And the reason we get these guys is because they're huge Uber users. So Ed Norton had a lot of really bad experiences with taxis in New York. He became a huge fan of Uber, asked if there's anything he could do. He said, sure, why don't you take our first ride in LA? So Ed Norton took our first ride in LA, and he took an Escalade to go surfing. Tony Hawk was our first rider in San Diego, and he took a car to pick up his kids from school. And then here's just a whole host of other celebrities who've all, kind of by their own volition, wanted to chat about Uber, just like everyone else does, because I think it's a fun thing. So that's a very quick breeze through of Uber from 0 to 2 years ago. And I think the question that was on my mind when I joined Uber is how in the world will this adapt to Asia, and how do we need to think about things differently for this part of the world? And I got a good year in Europe to buffer it. But I think my biggest takeaway from doing this for 2 years here is that 80% of what we do is the exact same. Just like if you're Travis and you're at a party in San Francisco, it feels good to have an S-Class pick you up. If you're in Singapore and all your friends are like running around trying to hail a taxi, and you have this guy who pulls up to your door and is standing like this, it feels just as good as it did in San Francisco. And we just launched in Nigeria. I'm sure it feels just as good there as it does here. And I'm the one who responds to customer complaints a lot of the time. That's kind of what you do when you're the first guy on the ground. And our complaints in Singapore and Shanghai and Ho Chi Minh City are the exact same as our complaints were in London. Driver was rude. Driver didn't have water. Loved the driver. He asked me how my day was. Opened the door. And people really want the exact same thing. So most of the product, we can really roll out a very, very similar product. And on the driver side, the drivers want to make more money. It's not rocket science. That doesn't matter where you are. The drivers want safety. Talk to taxi drivers about how often they've taken someone somewhere who didn't have money, or who walked away, or who threw up in their car and they didn't know what to do. And Uber solves that, because every time you take a ride with Uber, your entire trip is recorded. When you get there, the rider rates the driver and the driver rates the rider. So we know, bad behavior gets taken out immediately. If your driver took you the wrong route, we see an exact map of where you went, so we can refund you the money. And there's just kind of that safety net for rider and driver, which is just as relevant here as it is in Chicago or in Washington, D.C. January 2013, this was me and my friend Thomas, who is another Hong Kong guy who I got to work at Uber. We were sitting in a coffee shop at Starbucks trying to build Uber Singapore, see if we could build anything that would work out here. This is where we are right now. We're in 6 cities in India, we're in 4 in China, have a lot more coming this coming year. And the same idea, instead of on-demand ice cream, we also did on-demand lion dance. So for Chinese New Year in 3 Chinese cities, and in Singapore, you pushed a button, and instead of a car, you'd have a lion dance troupe that would show up and do lion dance. And apparently, actually, lion dances aren't that big in Shanghai, but everyone wanted one. And this was just one of the best experiences at Uber. We had just been in China for 3 months. And me and our local team, we show up with these guys, and the entire town squares would stand around. And these kids who'd never seen a lion dance, and it was Uber that was bringing it to them, and it was a really special feeling to get to bring that to a city. When we were just this really, really small concept there. The other story I tell about lion dances was that at 3 p.m., the lion dance troops actually went on strike, because they did not expect to do so many lion dances. We were just, the minute that we would finish the dance, you'd get pinged again, because China really wanted them. So we actually had to renegotiate in order to get them. Apparently, for these 2 guys, it's very, very difficult. So they're holding someone. So that was kind of Uber lion dance. I'll talk a bit about Uber in Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong, everyone has an opinion about transportation. And everyone, I'd say there are very few places. Everyone, before I came here, talks about, I think, I'll just jump forward here. Everyone has this picture in their mind about how easy it is to get a taxi, where you go to, you go out Hollywood Road and there are 10 cars just waiting there. And I think that's kind of a pretty vivid image in people's heads. So they say, why would you guys come to Hong Kong? It's easy to get a cab here and they're cheap. This is one of the first things. This is the number. They're called eyeballs. It's like a heat map, and it shows who's looking at Uber where. This chart was actually from January through March, so this was the 3 months prior to us even being here. So before we even got here, we looked at our kind of technology and saw that people everywhere were looking at the Uber app. And it wasn't just random. You can see that people were at the horse races. They were looking for an Uber, and people in Central. So we knew that there was demand before we got here. I think the other main thing, and I have this picture here, you can't really see it, it's like Robichon, and that's a street stall, is that everything in Hong Kong, and this is true everywhere in the world, and I think a big misunderstanding about Uber. I mean, what Uber does, above all, is Uber brings choice to transportation. It brings a choice, it brings new options, it brings people a really, really safe option, a really, really convenient, a really comfortable option, but we just bring a choice. There are few industries in the world, and there are absolutely no industries in Hong Kong that are as limited for choice as transportation, where some people have their own private driver, otherwise you take a taxi, and there's just really nothing in between. I mean, you have tons of choices with the MTR and the escalator and the boats and and minibuses. I mean, it's a phenomenal transportation network. But in restaurants, in hotels, in fashion, you have tons of choice at all points in the price curve. And in Hong Kong, you just don't. So I think that bringing a choice here is something that we've it's been really, really well received. Here's this image. I think there's also this image where everyone doesn't forget, but I always think of myself with my fiance. When we need to get a taxi, I go on Staunton and she goes on Elgin, and we text each other when someone gets one. Because there are places where it's actually very, very hard to get around this city, and that's what we found. We had Rider Zeros, Amanda Atson-Carlton. Amanda is a famous kind of model, fashionista. Carl is an actor. So we had kind of the same concept as we did elsewhere. How's it going so far? This here is, I pulled a quick chart. I don't put the numbers here, but gives you a sense of scale. This was our first month in San Francisco. And I've already showed you that Chicago and New York did better than San Francisco. So you can see we did about double as much revenue in Chicago and New York as we did in San Francisco in our first month. Now this here looks at other cities, so international cities like Tokyo, Paris, Sydney, London. We started doing better and better as we learned more and more. This here is Hong Kong. Our first month in Hong Kong was the fastest growing city we've ever had in the history of Uber. We're in 151 cities. The only disclaimer to that is like places like Miami where we flip a switch and US cities just go crazy the past year. But when we look at new countries, we've never had a new country which has grown as quickly as the business here has. And I think it's just about this idea of providing a choice. The other thing I'll say is, people say, I mentioned that there's that 80% of how do you adapt to the local markets. 80% is we do the same thing. The other 20% is hiring really, really local teams. I've been living in Hong Kong for 8 years. Clearly, I'm a foreigner, and that's unique for Uber. I'm probably one of the only, I think there are 3 foreign GMs in the entire 150 cities that we're in. Our LA manager is British, actually, and our guy in Bogota, Colombia, is American. So it's quite rare, but really hiring local people. We have, on the team, we have 6 people who were born and raised in Hong Kong. Our China team right now, one of the reasons I left the expansion team was because I wanted the entire China team to be Chinese. So really, kind of bringing our values and then hiring local people who can adapt, just the communication style, and who can adapt the culture of Uber, and who can think of things that are relevant. And that is an enormous, enormous piece of what we do. The biggest, I always get, when I'm talking to press or when I'm doing the radio stuff, everyone always says, what's the biggest challenge you face? It is always finding people who are passionate about Uber and who are deeply ingrained in local cities. And that is by far the most important thing for us to do. This is the last chart. This is just another thing that just shows kind of how the business is going. This is what our completed trips chart looks like. This is where I joined right here. And when I joined, the chart actually looked the exact same, because this, if you do that, looks like that. But I think people ask about the valuation and whatnot. All that we see, and we're not involved in investing, but all that we see is just that the business, and we're continuing to double total trips that we do every 6 months. So it's just growing like wildfire. And it's, and more importantly, I think that the business is making cities better, easier to get around, safer, more convenient, and that's really what Uber is all about. So that's kind of the crux of my prepared comments. Go back to that initial slide. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and chat about the business.
I'll go first. Can you tell us a little bit more about your actual business model, how you guys operate, particularly when it comes to the drivers, how you find them? Maybe this a little too detailed, but some of the liability issues that you guys might face and how you tackle those.
Sure. So that's an important thing. I didn't really go into this as deeply as we often do. Uber doesn't own a single car anywhere in the world. So that picture I put of our team was just 3 people. We're just a technology platform. And the cars that we work with, and I think people don't even know that this industry exists in Hong Kong, is the same cars that like the Mandarin Oriental or Four Seasons. Those companies work with limousine providers who do their transportation. Now, the nature of that business, though, is that you'll do like 2 trips a day, and then you have a lot of downtime. And these are the same drivers who drive celebrities. They're the same drivers who do VIP transportation, who Goldman Sachs would hire if we had an economist in town. So we find those cars, and we say, when you're not doing VIP transportation, why don't you work on the Uber platform? Our view, again, is that really nice rides shouldn't just be for bankers, or shouldn't just be for people from out of town, and shouldn't just be for people at hotels. It doesn't make sense. It should be for anybody who wants one, where and when they want it. So our model is we get those guys to log on to the app when they have free time, and then we make it available to other people, and the drivers take 80% of the fares. Now, and Uber takes 20%. We, on the liability side, we work with, because we work with licensed providers in Hong Kong, they all have insurance. Otherwise, they couldn't drive for the Mandarin Oriental. That makes it easy for us, is that we get the drivers who have the drivers have the insurance themselves. I mean, obviously, Uber itself has its own policies in place as well, but the crux of everything is really just being a connecting agent for drivers and riders.
You guys face a lot of competition from taxi drivers, inevitably, and there's been some publicity about that in various markets, but I've never seen how you resolve those problems, and I wonder how you go about doing it, because it must be quite a battle.
Yeah.
If you face a group of irate drivers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always crazy that in London, for example, 12,000 taxis protested Uber a few months ago. And that's crazy to me as the first guy on the ground in London, when I had to beg people to take a trip with Uber. It's amazing to me that they're all protesting now. Look, I think you have an industry that's very, very used to the status quo. It's an industry that hasn't really changed a whole lot for I don't know, 30 to 50 years. It's raise your hand, have a meter, and you get a ride. And then someone comes in and provides an alternative and creates choice in the city. How do we resolve it? We give consumers a choice that's safe, reliable, accessible, and comfortable, and help our drivers make as much money as they can. And we think that ultimately that's good for cities. You create jobs, you give consumers a safe option, and we think cities like that. Competitors don't always like it, but all we can do is focus on helping drivers make money and creating a good choice for consumers. And the good thing is that they can protest. That's the good thing about the world right now.
In some of the cities where your business is more mature and larger, say San Francisco or New York, do you ever get comments from drivers, for example, not wanting you guys to grow so quickly so that revenue could be more contained?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They do. The thing that is crazy about Uber is that the more drivers we have, the more money the drivers make. And it's counterintuitive, but the reason for that is the more drivers you have, your arrival times go from 12 minutes to 3 minutes. And then consumers start using it and they're like, holy cow, I can push a button and there'll be a car downstairs in 2 minutes. That's crazy. When you only have 3 drivers on the road, you can't do that. You're getting pulled from Kennedy Town to Quarry Bay to TST, and then the experience is bad, and people don't use Uber, they don't tell each other. For Uber, it's hard to get drivers to realize this, but ultimately, the more drivers that we get, the higher our revenue per driver hour is. So we know that there's just this virtual cycle where more drivers equals more revenue per hour, equals lower arrival times, equals more revenue per hour, equals more virality, and clients telling their friends about Uber. We know that. We have to convince them of that. And, but we do put in, drivers can refer friends and riders can refer friends, and everyone will get Uber credit if they do it. So we kind of put tools in place that encourage people to tell their friends.
What do you mean by launching in the new city? Do you mean like you have already enough, drivers using Uber? And how do you approach those drivers in the new city?
Sure. Now it's easier because now drivers have heard of us. So our first partner in Hong Kong, I spent 3 months convincing to be our partner in Shanghai, and they're a great partner for us in Guangzhou as well. So now we get inbound where drivers have heard about Uber. For a driver, it's really easy. You take an app and you turn it on when you want to. So there's not that much commitment involved. When you're launching, you got to sell. The most important thing is to sell drivers on the benefit of the platform. We won't flip the switch so that riders can book a car unless we have enough drivers who bought into Uber. So it's just kind of this, when I land in Amsterdam and set up Uber, the first thing I do is talk to drivers. and make sure I can get enough cars on the system that if someone books one at the train station, they'll get a ride. And then we go all out about getting riders and try to just kind of build both sides together. But the drivers always come first, and our launchers are good salespeople. You go in, and then ultimately, though, the only way you get scale is if your people do your work for you. So the drivers need to make money, and then they have to go tell their friends about it. It's the only way that one person can do it.
So are your back to your business model, are your drivers usually always they're in the business of commercial driving, or is it that they could be individuals? Because I recently had an experience in San Francisco, my first experience in wanting to try Uber.
Yeah.
And then we launched on the app and waited for about 15 minutes, and it was really accurate where it tells us where the driver is, and we could see the app and everything. And then when he's 3 minutes away, he canceled on us.
Oh, no.
And so that was a horrible experience we had. Then we started talking to taxi drivers about it, and taxi drivers said, oh, no, these are just Joe Blow from next door, and they don't have insurance, they don't have this and that. So this is I would love to hear your...
That's a very good question, and I'm sure that everyone, if you ride Uber enough, you're all going to have a negative story, just like if you use any product enough, but certainly one. I think one of the amazing things about Uber is that we've created such scale in a product that every single transaction involves two people interacting, finding each other in busy roads, and then doing a ride. I mean, it's amazing. And yeah, things don't always go right, so I'm sorry that you had that experience, but we deal with it a lot. In San Francisco, peer-to-peer ride sharing is legal. So you don't need to be a licensed operator in order to give a ride. And the potential for this is incredible. The peer-to-peer business in California, I mean, it is mind-blowing to think. If you know your city, you can turn on the app and you can make money and you can give people rides. And the great thing about the Uber platform is that if you get an experience like that, you give them 1 star and someone else does, and they're no longer on the system. And suddenly anybody who's bored, anyone who has free time. My mom's boyfriend actually is looking for work. I said, become an Uber driver. You know Milwaukee as well as anyone. I was in Tucson visiting my dad. I had an afternoon free. I'm not an Uber driver. I don't have an account, but you can log. So the potential of this ride-sharing business is incredible. And I mean, if you look at a place like California where it's legal, it really is an amazing business. And I think the potential it has to make it so people don't even need to own cars is really high. Uber X drivers are better insured than taxi drivers. We have very, very comprehensive insurance that insures all of them. We have blogs about it. If you look up insurance on the Uber blog, clearly that's an important issue. And in the states where it's legal, the insurance is there. So it's. I think it's an incredible business. What we've seen is that our users love it. We're able to, the other thing is that Uber is 40% cheaper than a taxi in London, and we're 25% cheaper than a taxi in New York and San Francisco because we don't have these supply limitations from this medallion system. So we're creating accessible, cheap rides that are giving people jobs, and that's high quality, clearly not in all cases. But that's the peer-to-peer business. So yeah, I'm sorry that you have a bad story. I'm sure other people do.
How do you determine the price then? Because if a fare is say $10, so how do you know in advance how much the fare should be, and how does the model work?
Yeah, our CEO actually had an interesting interview in New York Times where he just really talked about how Uber thinks about pricing. The goal is to get pricing as cheap as humanly possible, such that drivers still want to work on the system. And we're always trying to push that point. And if we're like, oh, this might be too cheap, that drivers don't want to work, then we'll take out our commission as an experiment. And we'll figure it out. So anytime we do a pricing call, the goal is to push it as low as possible. It's harder here where a Mercedes S-Class is just expensive to operate. So our multiple relative to a taxi is more expensive. But the goal, particularly in the US, here it's a little different. Here we actually have a luxury product. Here it's a really different kind of choice where we're 75% more expensive than a taxi. It's luxury chauffeur service. It's a little different than what the US has evolved into.
There's a lot of talk in the news a few months ago about moving into urban logistics, like couriers and things like that. It's very quiet. So what's the plan?
I think what I saw here when we delivered ice cream is that there's lots of opportunity to do stuff. The problem is that the transportation business is growing so fast. So it's really, really hard for us to say, let's move resources away from this business that's growing 2x every 6 months and focus on delivering ice cream. And so those options are there. We talk about them internally all the time. We're always thinking about what else Uber can become on the delivery front. But we have this transportation business, which is, just growing faster than we know what to do with, and that we really don't want to remove attention from. So recently we launched a business in New York where we do delivery, courier service. So it's there. But I think the focus of the company right now is on just continuing to grow this business. Our San Francisco business grew 3x last year, and that's our oldest city. That's just, so we haven't even come close to the opportunity in transportation.
Thank you. When you launch in a new city, you mentioned the Ride Zero and the Lion Dance. What are some of the other things you do to get people talking, day one when you need to get the customer side working for you?
Sure. I mean, we spend a month where we do what we call a test period, or we call it secret Ubers. So we would just kind of put cars on the road and watch and see what happens and spend a little bit of time figuring out the city. Like in Hong Kong, our arrival time said they were like 50% too high. So that wasn't an experience that we wanted to go too aggressive with. And we just gave it to our friends and saw what happened, and then we fixed that. And then after about a month or a month and a half, then we make sure that the press knows about Uber, and we do an event where we really go all out with the press, try to interact with as many of the press as possible. In Hong Kong right now, we're doing a promotion where if you tell your friends to ride and they take a ride, you get $100 of Uber credit. They get $100 off their first ride. So we'll do promotions like that, where every one of you guys who sign up for Uber has your own code, where you can, just through 10 friends, you get $1,000 of Uber credit. Stuff like that is enormous. It just pays itself back in months. I mean, it's incredible. Not really. Yeah. We did. Yeah, that was a unique situation. We did a pop-up here for Sevens, but that's the only city we've ever done that for. That's it.
Sorry. Before you go launch in a city, do you account for the technological level of the city, like Wi-Fi and number of phones per person?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle is credit cards. You need a credit card in order to sign up for Uber, which in places like India knocks out 90% of the population. Ho Chi Minh City, credit cards were a big issue. But truth be told, Amsterdam is 50% credit card penetration. They just use debit cards there. So that's a hurdle, and we're just kind of hoping that the people who do use credit cards will use Uber, and that they'll tell their friends to get credit cards. It's working better than you'd think. The technology, GPS in Hong Kong is pretty terrible, to be honest. So my house thinks I'm 3 blocks away. After I've taken my third, fourth ride, I know exactly where to put the pin so that the driver, so that first experience here is a little bit harder. And we need to continually be trying to get our riders to learn and to use Uber again. So we consider it, but we think that done is better than perfect, and that our riders will figure out how to use the service, and they do. It just takes a little bit longer.
Have you guys done or seen any stats or informal polls or something where car buying behavior in cities is being affected? Are people not buying a car in San Francisco now because you guys have become so convenient for them?
Yeah. I don't have polls off the top of my head. I'm sure if I had my US PR person, we would. But yes, ultimately the reason that we're pushing the price on that peer-to-peer product as low as we can is because what we want is that people don't need to have their own cars. That's what we're competing with. And to be honest, for me in Hong Kong, my goal is that people don't drive to work. It's not about, the taxis are filled. Like there are tons of people taking taxis. But I think if you want the Wi-Fi, you want a nice car, our goal is that people don't have to drive to work. And that's kind of what we see ourselves competing with. But in the States, as we talked about, yeah, I think you are seeing that behavior. I hear anecdotes all the time. Travis has some statistic that every Uber car on the road can remove something like 10 people driving themselves. And that's ultimately where this is heading. And you're seeing in New York City, again, I don't want to make this too US focused. I feel a bit okay doing it since it's AmCham. But in New York City, there's a great article in the New York Times about how parents are now putting their kids and sending them to school in Uber. And you wouldn't do that with a taxi, but with Uber, you see exactly where he's going. You have a driver who's 4.8 stars, so he's been rated before. You get a receipt that shows exactly the route that he took. And we're seeing that here in Hong Kong as well. I mean, that's behavior that, if you're taking your car somewhere, you can put your kid in an Uber and you watch exactly where he's going. And it's a really cool thing. Yeah, you can call the driver at any time you have his number. Yeah, there are other cities we've rolled out a peer-to-peer product. So there are cities in Europe and Australia where we've rolled out peer-to-peer. So it's a bit more nascent there. It's not in Asia. We take 20% of the fares. Every product can be different. Like I said, if we're experimenting with lower prices, we'll cut our commission out just to see if it works. But we take 20%.
In Hong Kong, Easy Taxi's made its debut. Is that your biggest competitor, and is that someone that threatens your market, or is it a totally different market? And how do they make money versus you guys?
Yeah, honestly, I got questions about competition all the time in China. I just look at the growth, and the growth in Hong Kong has been incredible. I don't know. I haven't used their service, so it's tough for me to comment on them. I haven't heard our riders talk about them. When I launched London, there was a company called Halo. I couldn't go a day without hearing about them 5 times. When that's the pace, that's when I see someone as a big competitor. But
were they private cars like yours are, or was it because the Easy Taxi is the Hong Kong taxi service?
Yeah, no, Halo's a taxi service, yeah, where you push a button, you get a taxi. And to be honest, there isn't a city in the world right now where you can't push a button and get a taxi. They're in London or in Singapore. When I was launching there, the local cab company had created an app. So it's quite common. I think we bring a really unique global product to the table that we've been able to grow despite competitors being there.
If you have a very superior car service, have you thought about essentially going for a bit different business model as well, as in B2B rather than just B2C? Or what are your strategies around that?
And what do you mean by B2B?
So you as a business would have corporate clients.
Yeah, okay. To me, one of the most amazing things about Uber is that we've been able to grow the way we have without really catering to the corporate client. I mean, it's just such a no-brainer client. And I think you're going to see a much better Uber for Business product coming out very, very soon. I think it's just such a no-brainer that Uber cater to businesses, because businesses want comfortable rides and safe and reliable rides, and we provide them. So yeah, that's going to be an increased focus for Uber.
Is there going to be an opportunity to actually schedule a particular time and place for the app? So like right now, for example, my wife's birthday is on Sunday, and I want to be able to schedule something at a specific time to pick up a specific number of people to go to someplace.
Yeah, the question is, will we do pre-bookings? And this is, as someone who launches businesses, this is the biggest question I get. Because when you're new and you don't have as many cars on the road, pre-bookings would make life easier. You won't. It's not a service that we're looking to have. The reason is when we get to mature cities, and that's where we see kind of all these cities in pacing towards, what Uber does is get you a car in 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, so there's no need.
Yeah, and a driver can do 2 to 3 trips per hour when you're doing that. If I have a pre-booking, then the driver has to wait a full hour where he can't be doing anything. So you've made your driver less efficient, you've made your whole platform less efficient, you have drivers going after a certain trip. And with Uber, our airport trips are a little bit more expensive, because what we want people in the city just going boom, boom, boom. Your rides, really, really efficient platform. And that's ultimately what Uber goes for, and we don't give the pre-booking option because that's really the goal that we're looking at.
I'm just wondering if Uber has a say on the types of cars the drivers use, like environmentally friendly hybrids or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, here we work with licensed cars. There aren't that many licenses in Hong Kong, so that does the work for us. Almost every licensed car here is a Mercedes S-Class or a Toyota Alphard. So those are the cars that you see on the app. So yeah, I mean, if someone had a licensed car that didn't meet the standards that I think our riders expect, at the price point that Uber's at, we wouldn't allow that car on the platform. It's just like drivers. We're constantly making sure that the drivers are good enough to be on the platform, they know the city well enough, and that the cars are up to the standards. But the licensing office here does that work for us.
I was just wondering, how do you kick somebody off the platform? I mean, like, this is Hong Kong, so theoretically, I mean, I've seen taxi drivers with like 9 cell phones.
Yeah.
So how? I mean, come on, everyone who's been here long enough knows. I mean, you kick somebody off, they could try and get back on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're a technology company, and I can click a button that says deactivate, and then their password doesn't work anymore.
Okay. So it's pretty easy to
well, every driver on Uber comes in and is screened, and we talk to for an hour and train, and they create an account on Uber, and we keep really close tabs on their ratings, and we keep really close tabs on their arrival times, and we have all this technology that tells us, is this the type of safe, reliable ride that Uber users expect? And and if it's not, then you owe it to your riders to not have that person on the platform, because that's not the commitment we have. So, but again, it all comes back to the technology that we have that just allows us to do these things that you couldn't do 10 years ago.
GPS system, how accurate is that? Because in Hong Kong, it can get very congested.
Yeah.
So how do you work around that?
We have, you can watch your car approaching. It's pretty accurate. If you try Uber, you'll see sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't work. I don't like this. My goal for every Uber city is for you to push a button, for him to say arriving now, and for you to go outside and he's exactly where you put that pin. And then you get in the car, and we're getting a destination feature now where the driver's actually going to see where you're going and have turn-by-turn directions there, so that you don't even have to tell him where you're going. You get in, you get where you're going, you get out and you walk away. That's what I want Uber to be. I want you push one button, and from there, everything's taken care of, from getting in the car to getting where you want to go to paying the bill. And someone who didn't know better would think that he was your own private driver who knew exactly what your day was like. That's what I want. In Hong Kong, the GPS, if you open up Google Maps, and it'll probably tell you that you're at the Cheung Kong Center right now. It's just the nature of Google Maps in Hong Kong, and we're heavily reliant on Google Maps. So here, we've started to ask drivers to confirm destination when they call, or when you book a car. So you'll book a car, and the driver, we're increasingly asking them to give you a call, say, I just want to confirm you're at the Bank of America Tower, because that, until the GPS is better, my vision of one button and then boom is going to be a bit tougher. So there are cities where we just kind of have to make that. If you're at dinner, then you can just send a text message and tell them. That's how we're dealing with it.
Yeah, but I mean, do you work with drivers sending you information through, saying, okay, this very congested area, don't take this route, for example?
Yeah, you can always, I mean, it's a person-to-person, I mean, you're on the phone with your driver, and you guys can figure out what you think is the best route.
But it's nothing in the app that would say...
Oh, does our app have traffic data? Not right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it does at some point. But yeah, right now we don't. Should we do 2 more questions, or do we have time here, Nate?
Yeah, it's 1 thing.
Okay. All right. So why don't you go? Yeah.
Just wanted to know where your next launch city, some of your next launch cities in Asia will be.
Sure. Well, I'll go to our fun map here. I mean, we're in what I'd say almost every single major city in Asia right now. We're in 6 cities in India. We're in 4 cities in China. I think the big focus is you're going to see China become a lot bigger. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Beijing is one of our fastest growing cities we've ever had. The Chinese market Guangzhou is doing incredible. So I think you're going to see that region expand a lot. Ultimately we want to be everywhere. So who knows, maybe Chiang Mai, maybe Phuket, you get off a plane, you can book a car.
Sam, thanks for the insights, really, really good. 3 months ago, I traveled to China all the time. I work for a big accounting firm, and we have 16 offices. I actually think that the corporate side of the business is huge, so you really should think about that.
Yeah.
I did have a great experience, so I know somebody mentioned a bad experience, but I had a great experience in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And literally, the guy turned up in an Audi A6, really friendly, really helpful, which of course for Shanghai is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I was just blown away in terms of that Uber experience. But I guess the question I have for you though is that great growth, a great story, but it's not all a bed of roses, is it? I mean, I would imagine there are some pretty major issues, and just I've worked across Asia for the last 20 plus years. I'm just thinking about the regulatory issues that, once you become bigger, and you are going to become bigger, that there must be some, I would imagine, there are going to be some pretty significant government regulatory issues ahead.
Yeah.
So what is that worst case scenario? Have you thought about that? And any bad experience? What's your worst nightmare?
Well, we're in 150 cities. There have been protests in a lot of them. And we've left one city. We left Vancouver back in 2012. We were there for a few months. But since then, we've still never left a single city. Yes, it is a regulated space, and it's a space where it takes a lot of education, where you have an incumbent, the taxi industry is just used to nothing else. What we just, is I've said this a lot, but it's true because my job is operations. What you just keep coming back to is that you're delivering cities a choice for consumers that's safe, reliable, and comfortable, and you're helping drivers make money. And that is what we do, and that is good for cities. And in every city, there are people who see that, who believe that, who appreciate that. They're not, but media will pick up the one person who doesn't. So we just keep building a business that consumers love and that helps drivers make money. And ultimately, we've been able to stay in every city we've been to because cities appreciate it. I mean, this isn't an Asia thing. In Miami, there's a rule that if you order a car that's not a taxi, you cannot ride him unless it's an hour after you booked him. So if I were to have my friend take me to the airport and he came to my house, he and I would have to sit there and look at each other for an hour before I could get in the car and go to the airport and pay him. So this is not an Asia issue. This is a global issue that there are cities that have regulations in place. And what we've found, though, is that if you build a business that consumers love, that the cities ultimately appreciate it.
But also a follow-on question about sustainability. We hear a lot now around this, and an S500 is not exactly the most sustainable friendly car. I know in the US there are a couple of interesting companies. Go Green Ride, they're in New York. They've got, I think, Prius-style hybrid taxis. I mean, is that something that you guys are going to look at in the future on the environment and sustainable side of things?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have enormous scale, right? So if you could scale Priuses, we would do it all day, every day. The vast majority of the cars doing Uber X, which is the cheaper version in London, are Toyota Priuses. I'd love to, we did a partnership with Tesla in Shanghai. I'd love to build out an electric fleet, or have partners who run electric cars. I just think it would be so good for cities, and it'd be really, really good for Uber. So that's certainly something that we want to do, and to the extent that we can do that in scale, it would be great.
You talked a lot about the drivers and the consumers. Can you talk a little about your employee experience, sort of what you're looking for, what their experience is like, and career prospects, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so Uber's, since I got to Uber's gone from 30, 40 people to 1,200, and it's just grown at an incredible pace. I think my role is actually basically the same as it was the day I got to Uber. And the difference, though, is that now the company's enormous. And I think that's what's the most fun thing about Uber, is that as the company grows, our careers grow. And it's versus Goldman Sachs, where you knew exactly where you were on the ladder. And again, I love Goldman Sachs, but you knew what you had to do, who you had to beat to get promoted. At Uber, we've all been promoted because we've built a company that's become incredibly relevant to a lot of people's lives. And I think that's by far the best part about working at Uber. In my entire time here, I can count on two hands the number of people who've left. Like, people get to this company and just become so immersed in what we're doing and so excited about being part of it that they stay. And I think if someone were to ask me how, just as an employee of Uber, how we've been able to grow so fast, because this growth is truly unprecedented. Our first investor was also the angel investor at eBay, and he wrote an article about how much faster Uber's growing than eBay did in its angel years. And I think if you were to say, how do you do this? It's hire people and then create a culture where they are so pumped about the business that they don't stop working. And it's great for the company. We can't go anywhere without talking about Uber. It's terrible for our partners and my fiance. And you get them together and they will complain about Uber forever. But it really is this environment where people are just constantly figuring out how do we grow the business, how do we become more relevant, how do we get more riders, how do we get more drivers on the system. And it's pretty wild how much positive energy there is in our chat rooms and on the email system. And I think it all starts with Travis, our CEO. And Ryan. These two guys, they've been in it from the start. It's a different kind of company. These guys built it with their own hands. It was this solving the problem they had in San Francisco. Because so many companies these days are like, oh, I saw that guy, let's do it and just brand it a little bit differently. Or let's maybe charge a little bit differently and see if it works in this part of the world. But Uber is really like just trying to build this thing from the ground up. And I think that is our biggest competitive advantage.
Where do we apply?
Talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I get shares if I refer you. So let's chat.
You mentioned the price point before that currently Uber is 75% more expensive in Hong Kong than taxis.
Yeah.
Is there, and obviously this has something to do with the cars that you're using and the licensing, that they are licensed cars. Is there a plan for you to, or is there in the foreseeable future, can we see cheaper Uber rides? And number two, where does the name come from?
Uber, yeah, okay. I don't know. Right now, I still see a lot of runway with the product we have on the road right now. I think we could not put enough cars out there to satisfy the demand. I met with a couple of 5-star hotels yesterday, and they said that their biggest complaint from customers is they had to wait for a taxi for 45 minutes, or they wanted something nice and they had bad service. When you meet with the nightclubs and say it's their biggest pain point is they don't know how to get people home. There's so much pain in the city that I've realized, and I've set up 5 different countries. I've never experienced this before. You go to a club in London, and they've got 15 chauffeurs that they snap a finger and they shove. In Hong Kong, the industry doesn't know what to do because you're trying to give a good experience and you put them downstairs and they're just fighting to get attacked. So there's so much opportunity being someone who can help solve this pain point that I think is incredibly alive in Hong Kong. And I didn't realize it until I started meeting the general managers from all these hotels and clubs and restaurants, where they say that their issue isn't the food, it's that when people come to the restaurant, they have to wait outside for 30 minutes. So I think the opportunity doing what we're doing, I think, is very, very immense. So that's kind of the plan, is to stick there. As for the name, it was, Uber has it's kind of like awesome in English. It's clearly different from, I think it's a word that's evolving in English. I think we're having something to do with it. It was originally called Uber Cab, and we got a cease and desist in San Francisco, and they said, you call yourself a cab company, but you're not using a taxi meter. So we said, okay, we'll just be Uber, and we got rid of the word cab. One more question, yeah.
On a logistical point, is your platform developed centrally somewhere, or do you have to get local developers to work in each city?
Yeah, it's all our entire engineering team's in San Francisco. I think there are reasons to get local developers now that we're in China, now you're in India, we're in Vietnam. I think you're starting to see technology is just very different in China, so we're starting to see some sort of reason to change that. But I think another way that we've been able to scale like this is by having a very, very consistent product that's very central. And again, done is better than perfect has been the mentality as far as just getting things out there and letting consumers do the work for us, and that's kind of how it's been so far. Cool, guys. Well, I'm gonna stick around. I'm happy to chat until about 2:15, and thank you guys very much for coming. It's really good to be here. One more thing I'll say is if you do use Uber, I think we have a code AmChamHK, which will give you $100 off your first ride. So give it a shot.
The invitation is in there, so if you guys want to use it, please do.
Yeah, please try and let us know how we can get better. As you know, it's not perfect.
For you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it, Nate. Thank you.